It was a Monday morning in late October when Daniel Crawford walked into his supervisor's office and came out a different man. Not louder, not angrier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that fills a room the way smoke fills a building before anyone smells the fire. He had worked at the same logistics company in Columbus, Ohio for 11 years. 11 years of early mornings, of missed school plays, of promises that the sacrifice was temporary. And in less than 4 minutes, it was over. The company was restructuring. His position had been eliminated. He was given a cardboard box, a handshake, and a security escort to the parking lot like he was a stranger in a building he had helped build. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. He did not call his wife Lisa. He did not cry. He just sat there staring at the steering wheel, and something inside of him quietly closed, like a door being shut from the inside with no key left on the outside. By Tuesday, Lisa noticed he was speaking less. She asked how the job search was going. He said, fine. She asked if he wanted to talk. He said, not right now. By Wednesday, he was waking up before sunrise and sitting alone in the dark living room. By Thursday, their two kids, Aiden, 9, and Maya, 6, had stopped asking Daddy to read to them at night because he seemed somewhere else, even when he was standing right there. And by Friday, Daniel Crawford had not said a single meaningful word to anyone in 5 days. Not to his wife, not to his children, not to his mother, who had called twice. He was present in the house, but completely unreachable, like a phone with a full signal that nobody could get through to. And then on Saturday morning, Lisa woke up and his side of the bed was cold. His car was gone. And a note on the kitchen counter said only 4 words, I need some time. What you are about to hear is not just Daniel's story. It is the story of millions of men across America who, at the exact moment life demands the most from them, go completely and utterly silent. Not because they stopped caring, not because love ran out, but because something much older than this relationship, much deeper than this moment, told them that to be seen struggling was to be destroyed. This video will take you inside the male mind during its darkest hours, and what you discover may change how you see the man in your life forever. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why does a man who used to talk to you every night suddenly have nothing to say? Why does the person who once told you everything, his fears, his dreams, the small things that bothered him at work, become a wall of silence exactly when life is at its most difficult? Why does he push away the very people who love him most at the moment he needs connection the most? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions that keep women awake at 2 a.m., lying next to a man who is physically present but emotionally thousands of miles away. They are the questions that have ended marriages, broken families, and left men like Daniel sitting alone in parking lots with nowhere to go. And here is the hard truth. Most people never get the real answer. Not because it does not exist, but because most men cannot explain it themselves. By the time this video is over, you will understand 3 things that most people spend a lifetime never figuring out. First, why the male brain is wired to retreat into silence under extreme stress, and why this is not a choice but a deeply conditioned response that begins in childhood. Second, what a man is actually feeling during those long, terrifying silences, because it is not what you think. And third, the one thing most people do that makes the silence worse, and what actually works to bring a man back. This is not about excusing the behavior. It is about understanding the psychology behind it so deeply that you will never misread silence the same way again. Stay with us, because what comes next is something most people learn too late. To understand why Daniel went silent, we have to go back long before Lisa, long before the job, long before the mortgage, and the kids and the life they built together in Columbus. We have to go back to a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who fell off his bike and scraped both knees badly enough to draw blood. And what happened next is so ordinary, so completely unremarkable, that most people would not even remember it. His father looked at him and said, "Get up, you're okay. Stop crying. Not cruelly, not with malice, just matter-of-factly. the way fathers across America have said it to sons for generations. And the boy got up. He swallowed whatever was rising in his chest. He stopped crying. And in that moment, without anyone intending it, a lesson was written into him that no classroom ever taught and no report card ever measured. Pain is weakness, and weakness must be hidden. Developmental psychologists call this early emotional suppression, and the research on it is staggering. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that boys as young as 5 years old already show measurable differences in emotional expression compared to girls, not because of biology alone, but because of social conditioning. Boys are interrupted more when they cry. Boys are praised more when they shake it off. Boys learn early that the emotional language available to them is narrow. Anger is acceptable. Stoicism is respectable. But sadness, fear, confusion, vulnerability, those are rooms they are told, in 100 small and large ways, not to enter. And by the time those boys grow into men, many of them have spent decades practicing the art of not feeling, or more precisely, the art of feeling without showing. The result is there is a generation of men walking around with enormous emotional worlds they have never been taught to navigate, let alone share. There is a clinical term for this that psychologists have studied extensively: alexithymia. It comes from the Greek, a meaning without, lexis meaning words, and thymos meaning emotion. Literally, without words for emotion. And researchers estimate that alexithymia, in varying degrees, affects up to 50% of men. Think about that for a moment. 1 in 2 men may literally struggle to identify what they are feeling, not because they feel nothing, but because the internal wiring between feeling and language was never fully developed. They know something is wrong. They know it is heavy. But if you ask them to name it, to describe it, to explain it, they come up with nothing. And silence becomes the only honest answer they have. Daniel did not go quiet because he did not love Lisa. He went quiet because he had no language for the terror that was living inside him. Psychologist and author Dr. John Gray, in his groundbreaking research on male emotional behavior, introduced what he called the cave theory. The idea that when a man is overwhelmed, he instinctively retreats into a metaphorical cave. He goes inside himself. He pulls away from conversation, from connection, from anything that requires him to be emotionally present. And critically, this is not abandonment. It is self-preservation. The cave is where he goes to process, to rebuild, to figure out who he is, now that everything has changed. The problem is that most people on the outside of the cave interpret the silence as rejection, as coldness, as a sign that something in the relationship is broken. And so they knock on the door, they demand entry, they plead and push and panic, and all of that, without meaning to, makes the man go deeper into the cave, not come out of it. Daniel was in his cave, and nobody around him knew the rules. When Daniel drove away on that Saturday morning, he did not have a destination. That is something people rarely understand about men in crisis. There is no plan. There is only the unbearable pressure of being seen in a state everything in him has been trained to hide. He drove north on I-71, past Worthington, past Delaware, until the Columbus skyline disappeared in his rearview mirror. He pulled into a rest stop somewhere in Marion County and sat in the parking lot for 3 hours. Trucks went in and out. Families stretched their legs. Life moved around him as if nothing was wrong, and that made everything worse. Because what Daniel was experiencing was not simply sadness or frustration. What was happening in Daniel Crawford's nervous system was something far more physiological than people give it credit for. When a human being perceives a threat, and for Daniel, the loss of his identity as a provider was as real a threat as any physical danger. The brain activates the amygdala, the primitive alarm system buried deep in the limbic region. The amygdala does not distinguish between a lion and a layoff. It reads danger and it fires. And the body responds by flooding itself with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing for one of three responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Most conversations about male emotional shutdown focus on the fight or flight responses, but the one that is most commonly overlooked and most commonly misunderstood is freeze. When the threat is too large to fight and there is nowhere to run, the nervous system does something ancient and automatic. It shuts down. It goes still. It goes quiet. Not because the man is indifferent, but because the system is overwhelmed. Daniel was not being cold. Daniel was frozen. And layered beneath the neurological response was something even more suffocating: shame. Brené Brown, one of the most respected researchers on human vulnerability, has spent decades studying shame, and her findings on men are particularly striking. She found that the primary shame trigger for men in America is the perception of weakness, specifically the fear of being seen as weak, as a failure, as incapable of providing and protecting. And here is where it becomes a trap from which many men cannot escape on their own. The very thing that would help talking, reaching out, admitting they are struggling, is the very thing their entire emotional architecture has been built to prevent. To ask for help is to confirm the thing they fear most about themselves. So they stay silent. They disappear into cars and spare rooms and long solitary drives. And the people who love them are left outside, not understanding that the wall is not made of anger. It is made of shame. Lisa called Daniel's phone 14 times that Saturday. He watched each call come in and go to voicemail, not because he did not love her, but because he did not have the words. And even if he did, saying them out loud would have made them real. There is a particular cruelty in that kind of silence. It locks the man inside his own worst thoughts and locks out the very people who might be able to help him carry them. By the time the sun went down over that rest stop in Marion County, Daniel had made and unmade a dozen decisions. He had thought about driving to his brother's house in Cleveland. He had thought about checking into a motel. He had thought about things that, years later, when he finally talked about that day, he would describe only as places I do not want to go back to. And that is the part of this story that nobody talks about loudly enough. Here is what nobody tells you. The silence is not the problem. The silence is the symptom. And if you treat the symptom without understanding what is underneath it, you will make everything worse. Research published by the American Psychological Association has consistently shown that men who feel pressured to talk, who are cornered, interrogated, or emotionally confronted during periods of acute stress, are significantly less likely to open up and significantly more likely to withdraw further. The harder you push on a closed door, the more the person on the other side leans against it. This is not stubbornness. It is a nervous system in survival mode responding to what it reads as threat. And the most painful irony is that the person pushing the door is usually doing it out of love, and the person holding it shut is doing it out of the same love, expressed the only way he knows how. What the research actually shows works is something counterintuitive and profoundly difficult, especially for someone who is scared. It is called presence without pressure. It is the act of staying close without demanding entry, of saying, I am here and I am not going anywhere, without the implied second sentence of, so you owe me an explanation. Psychologist Dr. Dan Siegel, whose work on interpersonal neurobiology has shaped how we understand emotional regulation, describes it as feeling felt, the experience of knowing that another person is genuinely with you without needing you to perform or explain yourself. When a man who is drowning feels that kind of presence, no questions, no ultimatums, no scorekeeping, something in his nervous system begins slowly and tentatively to unclench. The cave starts to feel less necessary. Silence starts to feel less like the only safe place. Daniel came back that Saturday night at 11:47. He knows the exact time because the kitchen clock was the first thing he saw when he opened the door. Lisa was sitting at the table. She had not gone to sleep. She had not called his family or filed a report or screamed at him on the phone. She had simply waited. And when he walked in, she did not immediately ask where he had been. She did not launch into the fear and the hurt and the questions that were absolutely legitimate and absolutely real. She just looked at him and says, Are you hungry? And something in those three words, the absence of demand, the presence of care, cracked something open in Daniel Crawford that 11 years of marriage, of love, of good intentions, had never quite reached. He sat down at that kitchen table, and for the first time in 5 days, he started to talk. He told her he was terrified, not just about the job, but about who he was without it. He told her that for as long as he could remember, his value in the family had felt tied to what he could provide, and that without a paycheck, he did not know what was left. He told her about the drive north, about the rest stop, about the places his mind had gone that he was ashamed to name out loud. And Lisa sat across from him and listened, really listened, without trying to fix it or minimize it or rush him to the part where it got better. They sat at that kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning. Aiden and Maya slept upstairs, unaware that their parents were having the most important conversation of their marriage. And when it was over, Daniel had not solved anything. The job was still gone, the fear was still real, but he was back not because Lisa had demanded it, but because she had made it safe enough for him to return. Daniel and Lisa's story does not end at that kitchen table. It continues, messily, imperfectly, the way real life always does. Daniel spent 4 months unemployed before finding a new position at a smaller firm. There were other silences, other moments where the cave called to him. But something had shifted, because Lisa had learned on that Saturday night that silence was not the enemy. And Daniel had learned that being seen in his fear had not destroyed him. It had, against everything he had been conditioned to believe, made him more present to his wife, to his children, to himself. The heaviest burden a man can carry is not failure. It is the belief that failure must be carried alone. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, men die by suicide at nearly 4 times the rate of women in the United States. 4 times. And researchers consistently point to the same cluster of contributing factors: emotional isolation, reluctance to seek help, the inability to articulate internal pain, and the absence of safe spaces to be vulnerable. These are not random statistics. They are the direct and devastating harvest of a culture that has told men, generation after generation, that silence is strength, that walls are protection, that needing people is a kind of weakness. And until we understand the psychology beneath the silence, truly understand it, not just intellectually, but in our bones, we will keep misreading the men in our lives at exactly the moments it matters most. The next time the man in your life goes quiet, and if you love a man long enough, he will. Remember Daniel Crawford at that rest stop in Marion County. Remember that the silence is not indifference. It is not rejection. It is a man who was taught, before he even knew what teaching was, that his pain was not allowed to take up space. Your job is not to force entry. Your job is to make it safe enough for him to open the door himself. Stay close, stay calm, make him feel felt, and wait, not forever, not without limits, but with the patience that love requires when it is truly trying to reach someone. Because the most powerful thing you can do for a man in his darkest moment is not to demand that he speak. It is to make him believe that when he does, you will still be there. Now we want to hear from you. Has someone you loved ever gone completely silent during their hardest moment? And did you understand it at the time, or only later? Drop your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this video opened something in you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Because there is a man in someone's life right now sitting in a parking lot somewhere, and the people who love him have no idea why he disappeared. Subscribe to this channel, because the mind never stops being worth understanding. And we will see you in the next one.